Hi, this is Cindy from Vintage to New, and I'm starting a new series called Sewing School, and I'm going to try to take you the best I can from the very beginning of how to start sewing. Now, the first thing that you need to have is the manual for your sewing machine. Whatever kind of sewing machine you have, you can find a manual online, a lot of times for free. Sometimes you might have to pay for it if you don't have the manual. If you purchased a new machine, it should have came with a manual. Also, if you purchased the sewing machine from a dealer, they will help you learn how to thread your sewing machine. Now, it is really important, whatever machine you have, that it's threaded exactly the way your machine is supposed to be threaded. A sewing machine is actually kind of complicated in the way that it works. There's a lot of knobs that have tension and all kinds of little adjustments that you can make, and if you thread it incorrectly, even the least little bit, it will not sew the way that it's supposed to. So that's our first thing, is we need to learn how to thread our particular sewing machine. Okay, if you have a sewing machine like mine that has a tension knob here in the front, what you need to know when you're threading your machine, and it's not always super clear in each of the manuals, there are two little discs inside of here, and you're going to put your thread in between those two discs right here, and your presser foot needs to be up. I should mention that first. So that thread is going to go between those discs, and then you're going to pull your thread until it goes into this little bail right here. Okay, so I'm going to do that again so that you can see it. I'm going to come down between those two discs. I'm going to pull my thread up. See how it's just pushing on that little paper clip looking thing right there. I'm going to hold my thread at the top. I'm going to give it a little pull, and it's going to click into place. Okay, you can see that it clicked so that it's in this little thing and coming up. So now it's going to be the tension that's needed to make your sewing machine work is going to be put onto that. Now, some machines do not have this, so like I said, you need to really pay attention to your manual on how to thread your machine. Okay, the next thing you're going to have to look up that should be in your manual is how your machine winds a bobbin. This is called a bobbin. The way a sewing machine works is you have thread that comes down through your machine, out the needle here, and then it picks up thread from your bobbin. So you have a bobbin thread and a thread from the top, and your machine loops them together underneath and causes that stitch that comes out. So you have to figure out how your machine winds a bobbin. Each machine does it in a different place, but the theory is the same. You want it to wind onto your bobbin so that it's nice and even, and it's nice to have several extra bobbins, because most machines you have to unthread, you know, your machine and everything, and wind your bobbin, and then if you only have one and you're sewing along and you run out of thread, then you have to stop, unthread your machine, wind a bobbin, and back and forth. And they hold an okay amount of thread, but it always runs out right when you need it the most. So anyway, learn how to wind a bobbin looking in your manual, and so that's my next tip. Okay, one other thing about a bobbin is it has to fit in some kind of a case. This particular machine, this is my bobbin holder for this machine. Some machines, my old Singer, for example, just had a little place here in the front, and you would pull it open and it would just drop in. It wouldn't have a case. So again, you have to rely on your manual to tell you how to put the bobbin into your machine. Okay, the next thing you need to understand is a needle for your sewing machine is, they're all different. There's different kinds of needles for every kind of sewing you want to do. So If you're just starting out, I would purchase a package that looks something like this. It doesn't necessarily have to have the double needle in it, but if you look here, it says this container has universal needles, okay, and it comes in different sizes. It's kind of hard to see, but this first one is a 70-10. All right, that means it's a very fine needle. So for doing very lightweight cotton fabric. Then there's an 80-12. There's two of those actually, and then a 90-14. So the farther I went this way, the bigger and heavier the needle got. For example, this jeans needle here. So if I was going to be sewing on denim fabric, you need to have a really sturdy, heavyweight needle. And this one is 116. So remember, the highest one in here was a 90-14, which for most even like mid to heavyweight cottons would be fine, but denim is even heavier, and so you want a heavier needle because you don't want to break your needle going through all those layers. Now I'm just telling you this so that you know that there's a difference. There's also what they call a jersey ballpoint needle. So this would be used on knits. So you have to have a different kind of a needle if you're going to sew on a knit. So that's a lot of information. Let's go back to this package here. This package had universal needles for cotton, and it had a couple of different sizes for knits, and then it had a couple needles for jeans. So instead of buying all of these when you're first starting, just buy a variety pack, all right? And for this sewing school, we're going to start out with sewing just regular off-the-bolt quilt weight cotton. So I would be using the mid-weight in here, so like an 80-12 universal needle. So that's what we're going to start with, and I want to show you something special about needles. Okay, so here's a needle straight out of the package. I'm using the denim needle because it's a little thicker, and I'm thinking you might be able to see it better. I'm going to turn it for you, and as I turn it, you'll notice, okay, right here, do you see? This is a flat side to the needle, and if I turn it around, this is a rounded side to my needle. It's important that you get it in your machine the right way, because if you feel down the back of your needle with your fingers, the side that has the flat side to the needle, it also has a little indentation in the back of the needle. You'll feel it with your finger. It kind of dips down like that. That's where your machine with the bobbin loops the threads, okay? So it's really important that you get it in the right way. Now, for my machine, let me take this needle out and I'll show you. My machine, the flat part of the needle, so here's the flat part, faces to the back of my machine, and I think most modern machines this is the case, but I could be wrong. Again, you're going to have to look at your manual. So whatever your manual says, that's the way that you're going to put your needle in. And so for me, I just go down in and I make sure that it's really loose so that that needle goes all the way up. You want to be sure that it's completely up inside of that casing there. And then you tighten this down, and you tighten it so it's good and tight so that it's going to stay in there nice and secure, okay? And so now my needle is in the right place, and for me, the eye of my needle is right here in the front. So then I would just thread my thread through there and back. Okay, I'm really sorry I couldn't be more specific about how to thread your machine, because truly each one is different, and so you're going to have to do your homework and figure out how to thread your specific machine. Some of the other things that you need when you start sewing, you'll need some pins, It's nice to have a safety pin when you get a little farther along. I'll show you what we'll do with those. So when you're buying your pins, buy a package of safety pins. You have to have your needles. We already talked about that. You need your scissors. Now, if you didn't grow up in a household where somebody sews, you might not know this, but you should have fabric scissors. These I bought at Joann's when they have their half-off coupon. These are really nice fabric scissors. You don't have to go super nice right out of the get-go, but if you buy fabric scissors, they need to be only for fabric. Have another pair of scissors for cutting paper. You could even use little kids' scissors, or I have this pair here. Paper dulls your scissors. Anybody who's sewing always gets kind of crazy about this, you know, that they don't let anybody cut anything but fabric with their fabric scissors. A lot of people who sew hide their fabric scissors because they don't want them messed up. So when you're cutting out, like my PDF patterns, for example, and they're printed on computer paper, that kind of paper just kills your scissors. So have a pair of scissors for cutting paper. You'll need to have some kind of a little ruler. This is one that I've had since I was really young. So some kind of ruler, but it doesn't have to be fancy like that. You could even get by with just, you know, your kids' old ruler from school, which is what that is. You need some good thread. Don't go to the store and purchase, you know, the bargain bin thread that's, you know, super cheap. Get the kind, this is dual duty Coats & Clark. It's less expensive than a lot, but it works okay. My favorite is, it's called Gutermann. Okay, and it's more expensive, but it works really well in my sewing machine. And for our purposes right now, we're just going to be using all-purpose thread. We're not going to be using anything fancy until we get more advanced. Okay, so there's that. And then you have to have your little best friend, a seam ripper. You would like to think that after you've sewn for a really long time, you're never going to make a mistake and you won't need a seam ripper. I've never reached that level, and so I still need my seam ripper practically every project, sometimes just for a little couple stitches, sometimes for a lot more. So a good seam ripper is really important. And then it's really nice to have something that you can mark your fabric with. There's all kinds of washout markers, washout pencils. There are pens that have disappearing ink, you know, so you can make a mark and the air will cause the ink to disappear. There's markers that make a mark and it washes out by just touching it with a little bit of water. So that's something to be looking for. Again, you won't need this the minute we start doing our beginning projects. So be watching for good sales, you know, to accumulate these little supplies. All right, so those are kind of like just our very beginning things that we need. And the last piece of sewing equipment that you'll need is an iron, preferably a steam iron. That would be very helpful. So that would be your last piece of sewing equipment. Okay, to recap this first video, your homework is get the owner's manual for your sewing machine, and then read up on how to thread your sewing machine, how to wind a bobbin, how to place the bobbin in your sewing machine. Okay, that's to deal with your sewing machine. And I would say that your first homework on your supplies is to get a package of needles that has many different sizes of needles in them so that you're prepared for your sewing. You need some pins, you need some thread, and you need to start working towards having a good pair of fabric scissors and a pair of scissors to cut paper, some type of a ruler, and a seam ripper, and then your marker or whatever can come later. So that's your homework for this first video.